Hello, listeners. This is Kat. Welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Prodigal. This will be part 14, chapter 14, entitled To Finally Rest. Shota did not often underestimate his students. He had realistic expectations depending on their skill, intelligence, and quirks. He underestimated Izuku Midoriya. Despite the reassurances, despite the kid's obvious skill, he had doubted his talents, his worth. It was another mistake he would regret for the rest of his life. In the end, Izuku was the best of them all. When the dust finally settled, there was a clear winner. It was not Shigaraki. The remaining villains who remained conscious, Toga and Twice, let out screams of outrage. They were quickly dispatched and joined their companions on the ground. The battlefield grew quiet as the wind died. Shota's breath came haggard and hoarse. Bakugo was on his hands and knees beside him, heaving. The pro knelt to help him to his feet. Both their gazes turned toward their savior. Izuku shot out of the grave he had made for Shigaraki, green lightning surrounding his body, like his own personal storm. His eyes, vibrant green and glowing, surveyed the yard for a moment. He looked like the perfect hero, with power and grace and soul. Shota grinned. Then he dropped. The vigilante toppled, collapsing onto his back as several cries of his name pierced the air. Shota did not wait for another second. He ignored his burning legs, his aching shoulders. His vision zeroed in on the fallen warrior. Frantic and searching, he dropped like an anchor was tied to his ankles beside the boy. Injury upon injury covered his body. For a fleeting moment he had recovered girl's name on his lips, but she was overwhelmed by all the other dangerous wounds, and the last thing Izuku would want was his life prioritized before anyone else's. That did not stop the horrible agony that filled Shota's entire being, when Izuku did not wake when he shook him. He grasped the boy's face gently, large hands cupping small cheeks. God, could he let this happen? Hey, problem child, wake up. The underground hero traced his thumb between two darker freckles. Blood swiftly covered his finger. Kid, wake up. Bakugo said that they were ready to bleed. Izuku had 2 holes in his stomach. They were leaking crimson. Ready to bleed. There was blood coming from his hairline and nose. It was matted in his beautiful curls. Ready to bleed. Not like this. This was never what they wanted. Ready to fucking bleed. Children were not meant to fight in a man's war. Izuku. The name came out garbled and choked. He used it so rarely. Why did he waste such precious time using his given name? Why did he ever call him a problem, imply that he was a chore, when he had the amazing privilege of his personal title? Izuku, listen to me. You need to wake up, okay? You didn't hear me before. There was no movement. Dual-colored eyes remained closed. I told you. His voice stopped. This was not happening. He could not lose another one. He could not lose any more people he cared about. I told you I loved you. Just like that, reality hit him like a truck. He had the broken body of his kid in his arms, bloody and bruised and beautiful, and he was still and cold as death. Izuku, I told you I love you. The repetition solved nothing. Shota shook, reaching down to try and stop the blood. His hands flitted from wound to wound, fretting over each injury. He has no idea what to do. He took Recovery Girl's ability for granted. Now, when he needed it most, it could not be found. His boy was dying. He heard desperate footsteps, but did not turn. Katsuki appeared on Izuku's other side, covered in blood himself. Aizawa lifted misty eyes, immediate reaction to soothe the crease between his blond brows. He lifted a trembling hand to wipe some blood from the corner of his mouth. His gaze shifted. Kaminari, who looked on death's doorstep himself, was weeping openly over Jiro's bloody body, holding her like she was a fallen star. Sero was at his side, trying to console his friend through his own cries. Kirishima was scrambling to stop Mina's bleeding side, hectic reassurances spilling from his mouth like bloody vomit. Momo was making bandages as quickly as possible, as she held Ida's still hand. Shoji and Tokiyami were supporting a heavily injured Hawks. He watched in slow motion as Enji's hand fell from its gentle caress on Dabi's tear-stained cheek. Shota was collapsed against his father's chest. They may have won, but this did not feel like a victory. Deku, you had better not be dead, you shitty fucking nerd. Katsuki yelled, frenzied touches finally settling on Izuku's shoulders. Wake up, Deku! Wake up! Midnight's voice appeared in the device in his ear. Eraserhead, what's going on? Shota's breath caught. Aizawa, what happened? The words taste bitter on his tongue as he stares at the expression on Kaminari's face. We won. The Murray sighed heavily. He could hear the blood on her tongue. What's the situation? We need medical. Now. He tore his eyes away again, as if summoned merely by mentioning the need for aid. The old woman came from the nearest building. Recovery Girl had arrived. She was surrounded by students and professionals alike who had healing abilities. A small piece of his terror chipped away. There was a person with her. Yagi's blue eyes latched on Izuku's fallen form like a laser. Suddenly, all Aizawa could see were those desperate eyes in that underground bunker. Gray and green, scar running down his cheek, freckles multiplied and dusted with red. He heard quirkless and unwanted, and suddenly all Aizawa wanted to do was rip out Yagi Toshinori's spinal cord. The retired number 1 was running toward the trio. He was going to try and touch Izuku. Shota would die before that happened. He shot to his feet like a bullet, letting Bakugo hold the body of his fallen friend. You bastard! Yagi slowed, but did not spare Aizawa the attention he desired. How is he? You don't get to be concerned. The ebony man seethed. He wished he had Enji's quirk. He wished he could burn Yagi to a crisp in front of him. He wished Shigaraki was still alive, so that he could ask him to disintegrate All Might and toss him away and let the breeze carry his ashes down to hell. He wished that he was a villain for a fleeting moment, just so that he could kill Yagi without anyone batting an eye. You don't get to act like you care about him. I do care. Go worry about Mirio, All Might. Go worry about the kid who is good enough for you. I don't want you anywhere near Izuku for the rest of your pathetic life. He was hissing, all venom and spit and hatred boiling on his tongue like the vilest potion imaginable. He wished he could force it down the other man's throat. He could hear Bakugo calling his best friend's name, and more poison welled up within him. You don't get to decide that. Yagi's frown deepened, and he tried to get around Shota's stalwart form. Mistake. Shota whipped his capture weapon off his shoulders faster than he could blink and threw it around All Might's neck. He immediately choked, eyes bulging. Yes, I do. I'm his guardian. Yagi reached up and ripped the scarf. Even in his shrunken form, he was still strong. Stop this, Aizawa. I want to make sure young Midoriya is... His name is not Midoriya, Shota suddenly screamed. You idiot. You don't listen to anyone but yourself, do you? Shota, stop. Look! Aizawa gestured behind him. Look what you did. This is your fucking fault. Just shouting it was not enough. Shota needed blood. He needed to watch Yagi bleed. He launched himself at the taller man, fist already poised to strike. The first blow broke his nose. The second bruised his jaw. The third was strong enough to almost dislocate his shoulder. The fourth sent the blonde to the ground. Shota did not stop. He knelt beside him and continued his assault as Yagi tried to defend himself. However, he had no quirk, no power. He was just like Izuku at the moment. Except Izuku was so much more. All that talk of nobility. Whack. All the speeches about sacrifice. Thud. All the shit about heroism, meaning running without thinking, about risking it all for just one smile. That was all you. Hit. 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 Shota ferociously gripped the front of Yagi's shirt with his bloody hand and pulled him up so that they were eye to eye. His nose was busted and his eye swollen. With horrible malice, Shota realized he matched Izuku. Horrible hatred, a thing that he had never felt before, roared to life in his stomach. Every injury on his kid's body needed to be repeated on this traitor, this coward, this villain, until there was finally justice. The words came from deep within him, and he screamed, You killed my boy! Bakugo was sobbing, grabbing at Izuku and pulling him into his arms. Shota wanted to tell him to stop, tell him that he would upset his already dislocated shoulder, that he was hurting himself, but the vigilante looked so peaceful, tucked into the crook of his neck, eyes closed. He looked like he was sleeping. Shota felt a tear slip down his cheek. His eyes met Yagi's. There were tears in his, too. I'm sorry, the man begged. Aizawa's gaze darkened. You don't get to be sorry. I never meant. More pleas, more attempts at forgiveness. Shota was no Izuku. He would hear none of it. Forgiveness did not run through his veins like the blood and now covered the ground around them. He did not bleed love like crimson. Honeyed words did not fall from smiling lips like sunlit rain. Don't you understand? But how could he? How could this man who had thrown Izuku to the side like last week's garbage ever comprehend the true value of his life? You killed my son. Once the declaration was past his lips, he choked. He had denied it up until this point. The lack of pulse, the cold skin, the pale cheeks, all of that could be dismissed if he had just had hope. But now he had said it. He had spoken those damning words into existence, and now it was real. Shota's shoulders hitched. As his eyes frantically moved from side to side, he released Yagi as if his hands were burning and stumbled back. No. No, no. Izu? Izu! Shota turned, just in time to watch Izuku jerk in Katsuki's hold. His shoulders lurched and his forehead knocked into his best friend's chin. A whimper escaped his tightly clamped lips. It was the most beautiful sound Shota had ever heard. He was alive. Shota sprinted back to his kid's sides. He collapsed to his knees, drawing Bakugo into his embrace and Izuku with him. He kissed both of their foreheads, chastely. The blonde did not seem to notice the action, which would normally send him into an angry frenzy. He was too busy burying his nose into Izuku's forest green curls and sobbing his name. Izuku's eyes opened slowly. He blinked furiously, wincing in the now bright light of the mid-morning sun. "John?" The teenager in question scrambled, pulling away to stare into the younger boy's eyes. "Hey, nerd. Hey, I'm here. I'm right here." It was so soft, so incredibly soft and sweet that Shota would have never believed the tone came from Bakugo. However, the love was obvious. Gloved fingers ran through rambunctious and bloody curls with practiced tenderness. Crimson eyes filled with tears held an exhausted pair of green and gray with adoration. "Are you going to leave me?" Izuku breathed, broken and hoarse and so wonderfully alive. "No, you fucking idiot." Katsuki wept, bloody hand reaching up to cup his freckled cheek. "I'm going to take care of you." Izuku winced, opening his mouth, but Shota placed a trembling hand in his hair to stop him. The other he raised to frantically wave over Recovery Girl. "Don't talk, problem child. You need to save your energy." "Dad?" And Shota really should reprimand him for directly disobeying a command, but the way that precious voice wrapped around that title like Eastern silk made him crumble. He sobbed quietly, fingers rubbing his son's scalp. "Yeah, kiddo. I'm here. Dad's here." "Did good?" Shota choked, leaning down to kiss his hair. "So good, Izuku. You did the best." Katsuki resumed his earlier position, gently nuzzling his friend's curled locks. "Finished?" Izuku asked, eyelids fluttering. The villains were gone. Shigaraki was dead. It was over. "Yeah, kiddo. It's done. You did it." "We did it," the young hero managed softly, lips twitching. "Together." Bakugo laughed wetly. "Yeah, nerd. Together." Izuku took a dangerously shaky breath. "Rest now?" Shota closed his eyes tightly against the childish want in his son's voice. Was that all Izuku had ever wanted? This child had lived through hell, had been ignored, neglected, bullied, and abused. He had been thrust into a world of power and potential with almost no training. He had been groomed for a suicide mission by a man who dropped him at the turn of the tide. He had been used, unwanted, and abandoned by those he trusted to keep him safe. 16 years of pain had culminated into this young man, but he was not bitter or angry. He was good, and he wanted to rest. "Yeah, buddy." Shota had no idea his own voice could be so tender, so kind. "You can rest now." Finally given permission, perhaps that he had been waiting his whole life for, Izuku's eyes closed, and he finally let himself rest. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 14 of Prodigal. This chapter broke me when I first read this fic. It was so hard to get through the first time without bawling my eyes out. I'm eager to hear your all's thoughts and reactions as well. Chapter 15, the last and final chapter, will be next. And as always, thank you so much for listening.